Hey everyone, welcome back to another week of the Triple Play. It's Danielle and Jake and Matt, usual crew. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. We could try to come up with some kind of fun way to start off the show, but a win's a win. The Vols got the win this weekend. It wasn't pretty, and I know a lot of people are wondering if this should even be considered a win for the Vols, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But the Vols beat South Carolina 27-24 this weekend. Tennessee had a 14-point lead at halftime, 17-3. But then they allowed South Carolina to tie it up twice in the third quarter whenever the Gamecocks ended up outscoring the Vols 21-7. And before we get into a discussion, I just want to look at some stats really quick. Josh Dobbs did okay. He didn't do too bad. He was 20 for 34, 255 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. But what is really throwing me off is the fact that Perry Orth did so well considering how much he has struggled this season. He's definitely, in my opinion, been one of the, I don't want to say the biggest struggle of a quarterback in the SEC this season, but he could be right up there. He's been very inconsistent. But Perry Orth was 20 for 39, 233 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions there. But the game was pretty much sealed with 32 seconds left when Jalen Reeves-Maybin recovered a fumble, in Tennessee territory. So the fact that Tennessee squandered a 17-point lead that they had early on in the game is pretty much, like I said, putting a lot of people with the perception that this game is questionable. This win is very questionable. So do you think that this game, this outcome, is a talk-worthy win?
No.
No.
Well, I mean, I believe that it's a talk-worthy win in the fact that you have to talk about how South Carolina almost drove down and scored at the end of the game.
Yes.
I mean, granted, we talked early in the season about how Tennessee's secondary just was not getting it done. But I will give large credit to Malik Foreman for punching out the ball with 32 seconds left. Without that, I think they would have scored, and Tennessee would have been left very disappointed after they came so close against a very good Alabama team last week.
I'm going to say yes, it is talk-worthy just because of the fact that they started coming back in the third and fourth quarter like we've seen so much this season with Oklahoma, Arkansas, Florida, all those guys. But this time we actually were able to finish it out instead of just not being able to do anything late in the game and then ended up losing. So I think it is.
I think that makes sense. I think one reason it's so worrisome for a lot of fans is the fact that, yeah, Tennessee was able to, keep up till the end to win it, but the fact that they had to do it, I mean, on good stops that they made in the fourth quarter and whatnot, but the fact that their winning drive was basically a field goal. I think that's what's worrisome because we've seen how Medley has found struggles throughout the season, but he's also had really big triumphs too. So I think it's just Tennessee fans just aren't happy with field goals. That's the easiest way to put it. They haven't been for years. They want teams that are going to come out there and get touchdowns consistently like we saw with Kentucky last week and with Western Carolina earlier in the season and like most people are expecting to see this week with North Texas. So I think the biggest issue definitely, yes, they did play till the end, which is what fans have been looking for, and I know that's what the coaches have been looking for too. But it's just the fact that it goes back to it was just a 3-point win after having a 17-point lead.
Yeah. In the press conference after the game, Butch Jones stated that he didn't want any negativity, that South Carolina is a good football team, that we came out with a solid win. But I'll admit, even as a fan, as a student here, there was a level of optimism in Neyland Stadium going into that game that several people possessed. And honestly, going into the fourth quarter, I looked up at the scoreboard and thought, wait a second, this is a close game. We might actually lose. It was kind of a shock to me because through the entire game I was like, okay, we've got this. You know, they can handle themselves and they'll get it done and cap off what looks to be a comeback season here at the end. But I mean, I just didn't think it'd be that close, and it was.
It reminded me way too much of last year's game against them.
Oh yeah.
It was during the third quarter. I just I just got reminded of last year's game and how close it was and how everybody felt there in the fourth quarter last year. It was bad.
Yeah.
And I think also it's also kind of scary the fact that both Tennessee and South Carolina have changed so much since last season, especially with Steve Spurrier resigning like he did. And South Carolina, it wasn't really expected for them to be the last place like in the SEC. This is a team where you're expecting a lot out of them, but it was a very tough beginning of the season. Things have turned around with the interim head coach. Elliott, I want to say is his name. So since he's coming in, he's doing really good things with this team. So it kind of makes you wonder if South Carolina is going to be on the upswing for the rest of the season. Yes, they did lose in this game, but they showed a lot of promise. And I think Perry Orth is maybe going to be making a turnaround, but I don't want to say too much into that because, like I said, he's been really inconsistent. But he looked really, really good in this game. And just South Carolina's offense in general looked really promising. So who knows what's going to happen there. But Tennessee will be taking on North Texas this Saturday for homecoming, and that game will be at noon on SEC Network. And one thing I want to note is that the Vols already have a 40.5 point lead going into this game. Like, they're the favorite for 40.5 points. Do you think that's actually capable of happening against this North Texas team?
Absolutely. I mean, North Texas, they've won one single game this year.
Right.
And I don't want to disrespect them too much. Mm-hmm. But just looking at what the Vols have done this season and what they've done this season, it's not going to be very close.
And it's not going to be very pretty if you're a fan of the Mean Green.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I've heard a lot of people comparing North Texas with Western Carolina, and it kind of makes me laugh because I don't really think a comparison could be made there. No. But I think Tennessee's play style in this game could be very similar to that game. I think we'll be seeing a lot of Dormady. It'll be good to see him back on the field, especially with how he runs the offense, reading the receivers like he does, or at least like he did in the Western Carolina game. So who knows what's going to happen there. It should be really interesting this weekend. But like I said, that will be Saturday at noon on the SEC Network. If you can't be at Neyland, definitely make sure you tune into the SEC Network for that game. And so moving into the SEC, we're going to talk about the rest of the SEC slate of games this week because it was a full slate. Every SEC team played this weekend, I want to say. It was all SEC matchups. So now we can say that there is no undefeated team in the SEC, and it's kind of hard to believe that. But Alabama handed LSU their first loss 30-16. And pretty much this whole game, you could look at different players and whatnot, but it comes back to Derrick Henry and Leonard Fournette. Mm-hmm. First, we're going to look at Henry. He had 38 carries for 210 yards and 3 touchdowns. And we've had the same storyline for Leonard Fournette all season, that he has just not looked human. But he has never looked more human, ever, this week. He had 19 carries, 1 touchdown, but only 31 yards. And this is a guy that we've seen 150 yards plus every single week. 150
as it's low, too.
Exactly. So for him to go from 150 down to just 31, that's incredible. That's not for him in the slightest, but for Alabama's defense, that's ridiculous if you're going to hold him to just 31 yards.
I think what's more crazy about that is that he had his longest run was 18 yards.
Yeah.
So that added like more than half of his yards right there.
Yeah. That's just, you expect Fournette to have 20 to 30 plus yards as like his longest. Maybe even a 40. Why not? But 18, I looked at that stat too, and I couldn't believe it. But you really have to commend this Alabama defense. And I know we've talked a lot about Florida's defense being one of the best in the conference right now. But Alabama's defense is really showing they're very, very strong. But that's no surprise. We've talked about it before on the show. But their offense, especially with Derrick Henry just looked phenomenal. But some of the talk for the Heisman race, we're going to transfer over to that really quick, has now been transferred from it being all about Fournette into moving into Henry kind of taking over as like the top SEC running back in the race. So, you also have to take into account that Trevon Boykin's still in there. He didn't look so hot this week against Oklahoma State, but we'll talk about that later. But you still have Boykin there. I want to say Ezekiel Elliott's still in the race too from Ohio State, and then one other player I'm missing from Baylor.
Corey Coleman.
Yeah, Coleman. Yeah. So Coleman and Elliott are tied for third, I want to say, and then you have Boykin at second, and then Henry was at fifth last week. This is all from last week's standings for the Heisman. The most recent one won't be released until sometime this week. So I guess the new discussion question I want to bring up is, do you think Fournette and Henry will be switching spots, or is it still just one game kind of defining what's going to happen in this race?
I don't think that they'll be switching spots. A lot of Alabama fans were going off online after the game for good reason about Derrick Henry, taking Fournette's spot, knocking him off that pedestal. But I think the way that Fournette's played so far this season, even getting just double-digit yards against Alabama, I think he's still at the top. But Henry's moving closer, and that's a frightening thought for LSU fans.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's also really interesting how, like you said, he's moving closer, because with the way Boykin played this week, I definitely could see Henry perhaps taking over Boykin's spot, or maybe just moving to a solid third place standing instead of just being in fifth. So I think it's really hard to tell. I mean, right now it's still November. We still have time before the Heisman. We still have quite a few more deciding games to be played. So it's just, I mean, you want to see Fournette win it after the season he's had so far. But this was an Alabama game where it was going to be close no matter who was going to get the win. I mean, I know I picked LSU thinking Fournette would have 150 rushing yards, but 31.
Needless to say, that didn't happen.
No, not at all, but it shouldn't be a big surprise. So we're going to go ahead and move over to an upset that happened in the SEC this week. Arkansas upsetting Ole Miss in overtime, 53-52. Fourth week in a row that we've had insane finishes in a game. And it was the second week in a row for a lateral. A lateral of sorts. It won't be the game-winning lateral. We'll just say that much. But it was 4th and 25 for Arkansas in overtime. And so Arkansas goes on to have a lateral, a fumble, and a recovery to put them in scoring position. I want to say they had 31 yards, a 31-yard gain on that range of plays between the lateral, fumble, and recovery to put them in range for scoring to get a win with a touchdown. But then they also had to get the 2-point conversion to get the win. The first attempt failed, but there was, I want to say, a face mask that was called. So then it brought it back for Arkansas to get a second chance, and they won it. So they won by 1. But it's crazy to think that this Arkansas team is now 3-0 after losing to Alabama a few weeks back. And I know we've talked about it before on the show if they're kind of on an upswing. And I know, Jake, you were talking about this before. This Arkansas team, I feel like we could be seeing some interesting things from them on the home stretch.
Absolutely. I mean, to come back like this against an Ole Miss team that, of course, as we saw earlier in the season, beat Alabama. Just an outstanding win for the Razorbacks. But one thing I kind of want to look at, I mean, obviously it worked out being that they won by 1 point, going for the 2-point conversion. But if you could be put in that position, would you have made the call to go for 2?
Personally, I would say no.
Against Ole Miss.
I would say no personally, but
I kind of want both of you to weigh in on this.
I think, after a play like that, like...
You kind of can't
go.
You can't not go for it.
Yeah, it was kind of like the Bahamas Bowl last year?
Oh gosh, yeah.
When they had that crazy 3 or 4 lateral pass and then went for the 2-point conversion and didn't make it. I feel like after a play like that, you've got so much momentum on your side that you just can't not go for it.
Yeah,
I gotcha.
I feel like, I mean, knowing me, I would take the safe way out. Just go to a second overtime. Have it where you still have that momentum, but go into where you can have better plays that are going to be executed. But for them to go, they got lucky. I'm just going to go ahead and put that out.
Yeah.
They had such a lucky break being able to have a second attempt on that 2-point conversion, because I know there's a lot of questions as if, was it legal? Was everything at the very end legal? But that's how it's been the past 2 weeks with these close finishes. But, I mean, you had to commend this Arkansas team, but you also have to think about how much of a struggle Ole Miss has hit since the beginning of the season. They were number 3 at one point, and now they aren't even in the rankings. It's just really hard to believe that. And so it kind of makes you wonder what's happening to this Ole Miss team. I mean, Chad Kelly has really he has started struggling, and it's really sad to see. He's been such a good quarterback, and we've talked about this before on the show too, but this Ole Miss team, they're really just... I don't want to say that they're breaking apart, but it looks like they're breaking apart slowly. So looking at the rest of the SEC games that happened this weekend, Mississippi State beat Missouri 31-13, and things have been very interesting for Missouri with some of their players going on strike and whatnot. And with Matty Mock. Yeah, the president resigned today, going along with that, so the players will be back playing this coming weekend. but also Maddie Mock being suspended for the rest of the season. It's going to prove to be interesting whenever the Vols take on the Tigers coming up in a couple of weeks. Florida barely got past Vanderbilt, and this is absolutely ridiculous. Florida wins it 9-7. 9-7. I kept watching these scores happen like while the UT game was going on. I could not believe it. But I'm also not surprised because Vanderbilt's defense has been looking really good as of late. But Florida, the fact that neither side of the ball looked like for Florida looked that strong. Their offense wasn't all that great, and the defense that we've been talking so much about didn't look that good either. But it worries me that Vanderbilt could be doing a little bit better now after this game. But I mean, it's tough to tell with this. That was just very scary for Florida and for a lot of SEC fans in general. And then Auburn beat Texas A&M 26-10. That's a pretty big upset there, but Texas A&M, another team that's kind of been flip-flopping this season. And then Georgia beating Kentucky pretty easily, 27-3. I know I myself and a lot of other people I know too were thinking that Kentucky would keep that to be a bit closer against Georgia. I mean, there's been a lot of problems going on. Yeah, inconsistence definitely. I feel like saying inconsistence almost like taking the easy way out on that one. It's just it's been bad for them as of late. But Kentucky also, they've looked not too bad, but to only get 3 points on this, that was a really big problem. And Patrick Tolles too. I haven't looked at his stats, but from what I've heard, it was just not a pretty game for him whatsoever. So going into the rankings now for this week, the AP rankings show 4 SEC teams in the rankings. Alabama is at number 3, LSU at number 9, Florida at number 11, and Mississippi State is at number 20. And so last week, the first set of the college football rankings were released. And I want to say that it showed Clemson at number 1, LSU at number 2, Ohio State 3, and then Alabama at number 4. So, and then Notre Dame and Baylor were at 5 and 6. So going into this week, though, looking at what the AP rankings are, since the college football playoff rankings won't be released until Tuesday, we have Clemson at number 1, Ohio State at number 2, Alabama at number 3, Baylor at 4, and then Oklahoma State and Notre Dame at 5 and 6. So I guess looking at this right now, one question that comes up is with Clemson, do you think they are worth that number 1 spot? Even though they are 9-0, but Ohio State is also 9-0 as well. But Ohio State's been playing cupcakes like a lot of people have been talking about. So is Clemson worth that number 1 spot that they have?
I think from what we've seen so far, they are. They're playing in a Power 5 conference. Yeah. They have actual hard games, and they've found a way to win them. And they have star quarterback in Deshaun Watson. I just from what I've seen, I do believe that they are deserving of the number 1 spot. Whether they'll keep it or not, I think it's too early to say. Yeah. But for right now, what we've seen so far, I think they do deserve to be number 1.
And I agree with that, and especially with Watson, because I'm gonna use this as a segue to go into the Clemson game from this weekend. They beat Florida State 23-13 to clinch the ACC Atlantic, but Deshaun Watson, he was the leader passing and rushing for the Tigers this week, and his stats were pretty insane. He was 28 for 42, 297 yards with 1 touchdown, but he also rushing had 16 carries for 107 yards and no score there, and he has looked stellar. He is a very good quarterback, a very good playmaker for this Clemson team. But one thing to note with this game that I think is pretty important, I feel like it's kind of being overlooked, is the fact that Florida State had 2 turnovers. Granted, this Seminoles team has not looked as strong as they have in past seasons, especially last season. They just haven't looked the same since they won the BCS a couple years back. I feel like this game, yes, it was big for Clemson. I mean, it was a number 1 against number 16 team, I want to say at the time. But I feel like out of all the games, Clemson's played tough games, like you said, Matt. But I think also this was probably one of their tougher ones, just because Florida State is, I mean, if anybody could beat Clemson, I thought it was going to be Florida State. Yeah. But I think it's definitely too early to tell if they're going to be able to keep that number 1 spot, because if you look at the top 4 teams right now in the AP rankings, Baylor, Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson, all 4 teams are really good. And then Oklahoma State at number 5, I'm staring at them because they could definitely be a dark horse by the end of the season.
Very much so.
So going over to the Oklahoma State game, they upset TCU this week 49-29. And I know a lot of people were saying that this game should have been much more high scoring instead of just having 78 points scored. Because both teams, we've seen them put up 70 points throughout the season. They've put 70 points up in 2 different games, I want to say. 1 game apiece for each team. So for Oklahoma State to hold TCU to 29 points, that's really interesting. Trevon Boykin was 35 for 57, 445 yards. Yeah, that yardage number is great, but he only had 1 touchdown and 4 interceptions. And then if you look over at Mason Rudolph for Oklahoma State, he was 16 for 24, 352 yards with 5 touchdowns. So with a performance like this, and with them being number 5, I think they could be a dark horse. But do you think that they proved themselves in this game to be worthy of playoff contention? Could they be in a top 4 spot by the end of the season?
By the end of the season, they definitely could be. It's definitely going to come down to when they play Baylor. I feel like the winner of that game will probably get into the college football playoff.
Yeah, I'm going to go as far as to say the winner of that game could be in the championship game.
I would agree.
And I mean, Baylor's really good, but Oklahoma State has been very surprising. And they moved up 7 points this week with this win. TCU, I want to say, they fell down. Yeah, they fell 8 spots. They're down at number 13 now. So for them to move up 7 points on this game, I mean, TCU they were looking as a really solid favorite going into the playoffs. So I think definitely Oklahoma State, Baylor, that's going to be an interesting game. But I definitely would go out to say that the winner of that game could potentially be in the championship. I think that's a pretty solid prediction to be making. So looking at other games that happened in the NCAA this weekend, Northern Illinois beat Toledo 32-27. You hate to see that for Toledo. They were looking really strong, but Northern Illinois is a really good team, and they were good with Jimmy Garoppolo too. So it's good to see that success still moving along with Northern Illinois. Baylor beat Kansas State 31-24. Temple beat SMU 60-40. That's a really good win for the Owls there. They're now 8-1 on the season. Ohio State beat Minnesota 28-14. Notre Dame beat Pitt 42-30. That was closer than I was kind of anticipating. Yeah, it was a 12-point loss, but I really thought Notre Dame was just going to blow Pitt out of the water, even though Pitt has been looking much better this season. Nebraska beat Michigan State 39-38, and I'm still surprised that even happened. That was Michigan State's first loss on the season, but congrats to Nebraska on that win. Iowa beat Indiana 35-27, and I'm going to open this up. How is Iowa still undefeated?
They haven't played anybody.
That's true.
That's about it.
Insert Ohio State cupcake schedule meme here.
Right. It's just sad. I mean, this is good for Iowa. I mean, seeing how they played against the Vols in the Tax Slayer Bowl, it's just, how can they be undefeated, even with playing cupcake teams, too? Yeah. You would think that one of them would come around and just beat the Hawkeyes, but they haven't. Looking at other games, Stanford beat Colorado 42-10. Utah beat Washington 34-23. Navy upset Memphis 45-20. Memphis has been looking really strong, but Navy has also been looking good. I feel like they've been overlooked a lot this season. Oklahoma beat Iowa State 52-16. Michigan beat Rutgers 49-16. And Northwestern beat Penn State 23-21. I was not looking for that to be that close. A 2-point game. Penn State has been looking okay this season too, but Northwestern has looked substantially better in my opinion. So that's really surprising. There was only a 2-point differential there. And UCLA beat Oregon State 41-0. Easy win there for the Bruins. And rounding it out, Houston beat Cincinnati 33-30. Houston is still undefeated, and they're 5-0 in the American Conference as well. So a lot was going on this weekend in college football, but now we're just going to go ahead and move over to the NFL. And who knew the Titans could get another win? Now they are 2-8 on the season. Excuse me. I'm sorry, they're 2-6 on the season. But they beat the Saints 34-28 in overtime. And Marcus Mariota was back this week. He's been gone since November 18th, I want to say. Or October 18th, excuse me. He was 28 for 39 in this game against the Saints with 371 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interceptions. But this is a good win for the Titans, but you have to take into account that this Saints team is not looking as strong as they definitely should be. So the question that comes up with this game is the win more attributed to Mariota coming back, or is it because of Wisenhunt being fired last week? They fired him in the middle of the season. He was 3-20 in a season and a half at the helm for the Titans. So which one is the leading cause to this win, or is it both?
I said it before the show. I say both. Mariota was a fantastic draft pick for the Titans. Coming in, I think we all knew that he would impact this franchise immediately and in good standing, and he did so against Tampa Bay in their first game of the season, getting hurt, obviously a big setback for them, but then coming back in really great fashion against the Saints. I know that the Saints have not been looking great lately, but you have to give credit where credit's due to Mariota because New Orleans is always a very hostile atmosphere.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Also, but Wisenhunt, just what can you really say? I mean, just obviously a good move by the front office in Nashville to fire him, but I mean, that's just the absence of, well, I don't really want to say the absence of a head coach, but I mean, I guess a renewal in a way. Just, a new start with Mariota coming back and just kind of a revived energy, if you will.
I could see that. And I think also, looking over at Drew Brees' stats for the game, they weren't bad as well. He was 28 for 39, 387 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. You're not really used to seeing Drew Brees throw interceptions, at least in the past few years. He was also sacked 4 times. You have to take that into account as well. But I would definitely, Wisenhunt, he's not the kind of guy you could see as a head coach. I mean, he's been in a few different teams. He was with the Steelers as an offensive coordinator. He was with the Cardinals for a time. He was with the Chargers before this as their offensive coordinator too, I want to say. So it's just, I don't really look at Ken Wisenhunt as being a head coach. He's definitely more of a coordinator. He should not be in the helm for a team. And whenever he got picked up by the Titans, I kind of questioned it. I remember saying to my dad, I was like, I don't see this really working out for him. Like I said, he's definitely more of a coordinator. Mariota, this was definitely the game that he needed after coming back from an injury. And he also had 1 carry for 5 yards rushing as well. So it was good to see him being mobile like that. But I would definitely go with saying both. I mean, you do want to commend Mariota for the game that he had, but it also looked like a different team not having Wisenhunt there calling plays and coaching this team. But I don't know. Could this be the turnaround that the Titans are looking for? I mean, yeah, it's 1 win, but it's an overtime win, so I feel like that could definitely boost their momentum a little bit. But it's hard to tell right now. And another game to look at that's definitely not what a lot of Tennessee Vols fans were wanting to see, or just fans of Peyton Manning in general, but the Broncos were handed their first loss by the Colts, 27-24. Peyton was 21 for 36, 281 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, and I'm pretty sure that puts his interceptions total this season up to 13, I want to say. I might be off on that. I believe it is 13, but it's just, you're not expecting to see this from Peyton. But Andrew Luck, too, was 21 for 36, so they had the exact same completions and attempts, which is really impressive. But Luck he had 252 yards for 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, and they both were sacked once. So it's just, this is a tough loss for the Broncos. It is their first loss, so now there's only 3 undefeated teams. But this game, it looked to be going in Indianapolis' way from the beginning. Going into halftime, the Colts had a 17-7 lead, and then the Broncos were able to tie it up early on in the third quarter. So after that, I mean, Indianapolis pretty much just took control in the fourth quarter, outscoring the Broncos 10-7 to give them the win. But you have to commend this Colts team for getting this win. They're now 4-5 on the season. So going into this, I was going to pick the Broncos to win it. I just didn't think that Luck and the Colts could pull it out, but it looks like they got pretty lucky on this one because Andrew Luck he looked really good. But like I said, there are 3 undefeated teams now in the NFL. That's the Patriots, Cincinnati, and Carolina. So the question now is, will these teams remain undefeated, and how long will they remain undefeated?
I think the Patriots, they're going to stay undefeated for the longest. They've looked the best. coming off a Super Bowl win.
Mm-hmm.
I just think they're the strongest of the three teams.
Mm-hmm.
The Bengals and the Panthers both. They're actually a nice little surprise.
Yeah.
Being undefeated this late in the season.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good for them, but I don't see them staying undefeated for too much longer.
Yeah, I could agree with that. And I think that's really true for Cincinnati because they are in easily one of the tougher divisions in the NFL, but it hasn't been that way for the past few seasons in the AFC North. But looking at the Patriots season, what they have left in their schedule, they have to take on the Giants, the Bills, the Broncos, Eagles, Texans, Titans, which that looking as it has been the past few weeks, that'll be an easy win for them. But then they finish off the season against the Jets and the Dolphins. So it's just, I mean, if they're going to lose a game looking at this, maybe they could lose to the Broncos. Maybe Peyton could pull it out, showing that he could be better, or that he is better than Tom Brady. But, I mean, that Broncos game could be interesting. Eagles game might be a little bit interesting, but I don't know. They could easily win it out, and that's just tough to say. But anything's possible. We've seen it in college football, and we've seen it in the NFL too this season, that an undefeated team can definitely be shown that they aren't as perfect as they may think. But it's really tough with this Patriots team because they're looking great. Tom Brady's looking great. Their whole offense in general is looking good, and their defense hasn't been too bad. They've been pretty good too, but they're leading the AFC East standings right now. The team that's closest behind them is New York at 5-3. So, I mean, right now I definitely agree with you, Matt. I think the Patriots will stay undefeated the longest.
Actually, I did have something. I don't want to make any predictions, and I don't think that they have much of a chance. Of course, you can never say never, but when New England faces the Miami Dolphins, we talked before the show about a revival in Miami with their interim head coach, Dan Campbell, and I mean, they haven't been doing just fantastic, but obviously a big improvement from Joe Philbin. And
absolutely.
I believe that New England is going to get the win, but I really am just interested to see how the Dolphins fare against New England. I
am too, and I think looking at that game, I'm interested to see what the point spread's going to be whenever it gets to that point, because that could be a very close game. And I mean, I do see the Patriots winning that one, but that could be by single digits.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of really a strong prediction to make right now, but that's definitely possible.
Just something to look for late in the season.
Absolutely. And I mean, like you said, late in the season, anything could happen to the Patriots team late in the season, because there's going to be breaks that are going to be made in this team. We've seen it before, so it's going to be really interesting. But other games that happened this week, Thursday night, we saw the Bengals and the Browns take on each other, and the Bengals got that win 31-10. Looked pretty easy against this struggling Browns team. They're 2-7 on the season. The Packers beat the Panthers the Panthers beat the Packers 37-29. Patriots beat the Redskins 27-10. Bills beat the Dolphins 33-17. Vikings beat the Rams in overtime 21-18. Teddy Bridgewater got injured in that, and I know a lot of talk has been going on between coaches on that game. So you hate to see Bridgewater go down like he did, but hopefully he'll come back soon. I don't know what the severity of his injury is, but more should be released on that soon. The Jets beat the Jaguars 28-23. Steelers beat the Raiders 38-35. That was not an easy game to watch if you're a Steelers fan. I know for me, I was cringing at the end. It was a 19-yard field goal attempt for Boswell, and he made it. He missed his first career field goal in that game for the Steelers as well, so that's really interesting. But Ben Roethlisberger is out for a week, I want to say, with an ankle injury, I believe it is. So that should be interesting to see what happens. They'll be going to Landry Jones next week, most likely, for that start. Giants beat the Buccaneers 32-18. 49ers beat the Falcons 17-16. That is hard to believe it was that close. 49ers are now 3-6 on the season, and the Falcons were 6-3. So that could be really interesting for the 49ers going on. The Eagles beat the Cowboys 33-27, and then the Monday night game tonight will show the Bears traveling to San Diego to take on the Chargers. Right now, the Chargers are they are a 4.5-point favorite, so that could be really interesting to see what happens tonight in that game. And really quick before we go off the air, basketball is back on Rocky Top. The men won their exhibition game against Alabama Huntsville 96-83 on Friday night, but the regular season will tip off this Friday against UNC Asheville. And then the Lady Vols have an exhibition game against Carson Newman tonight. And then their regular season will tip off next Sunday against Central Arkansas. So it's good to have basketball back on Rocky Top. But that looks to be everything that we had this week. So happy homecoming week. Join us next week as we talk about the homecoming game and look forward to the rest of the season. Looking forward to that Mizzou game. That should be really interesting. I'm getting ready for the season to wrap up here on Rocky Top for football. So it's really, really sad to think about, actually. But basketball's back, so we all will be very happy to be covering the men balls and the lady balls work on the hardwoods. So thank you for joining us this week, and we will see you next week.